It was Christmas in Carnation, Washington. Holiday lights were glowing in a cozy home where a family was about to get together, and an unspeakable horror was about to take place, leaving 6 people brutally murdered. What twisted motives could drive someone to such unimaginable violence on a night meant for peace? Tucked away in the shadow of towering evergreens, just 25 miles east of Seattle, Carnation, Washington seemed like the perfect haven. A quiet rural town with a population of 2,000 people, surrounded by lush forests and winding roads. But even the most tranquil places can harbor sinister secrets. In 2007, the Anderson family lived what seemed to be a charmed life. But as Christmas approached that year, something eerie was brewing, hidden behind the snow-covered trees. Their 5-acre wooded property was the kind of place that felt safe, secluded, and serene. But sometimes, appearances can be deceiving. Wayne Anderson, 60 years old, was a dedicated Boeing engineer who had spent decades building a stable, loving home. His wife, Judy, 61 years old, was warm, kind, and beloved by everyone who knew her. She had worked tirelessly as a mail carrier. Together, they raised their children with a sense of loyalty and tradition. Their son Scott, 32 years old, had found his calling as a carpenter. He worked in construction and painted cars as a sideline. His colleagues said he was a friendly guy. He worked insane hours, and when he wasn't working, he was devoted to his family. He and his wife, Erica, who was also 32, were high school sweethearts who had grown together, built a life together, and were raising 2 beautiful children. Olivia, just 5 years old, and Nathan, 3 years old, were the darlings of the family, wide-eyed and full of curiosity, filling the Anderson home with their laughter and energy. Erica, known for her nurturing and protective nature, was a devoted stay-at-home mother. Judy and Wayne Anderson had lived in the home since the early 1980s and later purchased the adjacent piece of land dotted with outbuildings. Living just 200 yards away in a small mobile home on the family's property were Wayne and Judy's youngest daughter, Michelle Anderson, and her boyfriend, Joseph McEnroe. Michelle, at the age of 29, was unemployed, and Joseph, also 29 years old, worked at a Target store. It was December 24th, 2007. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the wooded, snow-covered property was blanketed in a peaceful stillness. Wayne and Judy were inside their home, preparing for the arrival of Scott, Erica, and their 2 children. The smell of a roast cooking in the oven filled the air. Judy was wrapping the last of the gifts, while Wayne relaxed in the living room in front of the TV, enjoying the peace before the bustle of family filled the house. It was a picture of serenity, but just beyond the glow of the windows, something far darker was approaching. In the small mobile home just yards away, Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were making their final preparations. To their family, they were simply the youngest daughter and her quiet boyfriend, reserved, maybe a little distant, but family nonetheless. They were sitting in silence. On the table in front of them lay a 9mm handgun and a .357 Magnum revolver. They weren't planning to join the family celebration that night. They had something else in mind, a plan they had meticulously crafted. Outside, the snow fell gently, muffling every sound except for the crunch of boots. The night was cold and still. The pair set out for the Anderson family home, just a short walk from their own. Each of them was armed with a handgun. Michelle's 9mm was hidden in her sweater, but they also were armed with something else, the trust of the people inside that home. Around 4 p.m., they walked into the warmly lit Anderson home. Inside, Judy greeted them warmly, her mind still on the gifts she was wrapping, so she returned to the back room. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal, but this illusion shattered as soon as Michelle raised her gun. Her first attempt to shoot Wayne failed. The weapon jammed. It was Joseph who stepped in, pulling the trigger and firing the fatal shots in the head. Wayne slumped lifelessly in his chair. Judy, hearing the gunfire, rushed into the living room. Joseph silenced her with 2 gunshots to ensure she wouldn't survive. The warmth and peace of the Anderson home were replaced with cold, calculated violence. The pair worked methodically. Dragging Wayne's and Judy's bodies outside, they placed them in a shed behind the house. Inside, they gathered towels and carpets and cleaned up the stains. wiping away any evidence of the crime. But this was only the beginning. An hour later, Scott Anderson, his wife Erica, and their 2 young children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan, arrived for the family gathering from their home in Black Diamond. They were unaware of the horror that awaited them. As they stepped inside, they took off their shoes. Scott sank into his usual spot at the end of the couch. They had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Michelle and Joseph were waiting. Scott was the first to notice something was off. When Michelle pulled her gun, Scott acted instinctively, charging at her in a desperate attempt to protect his family. But he couldn't stop what was already set in motion. Michelle shot him multiple times. He fell to the floor, lifeless. Michelle then shot Erica Anderson twice. Erica, wounded but desperate to save her children, crawled toward the cordless phone. Her trembling hands managed to dial 911. The brief call connected, and dispatchers heard faint voices, chaotic, muffled sounds that were misinterpreted as an argument or party. Before Erica could say more, Joseph ripped the phone from her grasp, removed the batteries, and smashed it on the floor. In her final moments, Erica held her children close and begged for their lives. "Not the kids, no," she asked. Erica Anderson pleaded with McEnroe not to shoot her, saying, "You don't have to do this." But Joseph showed no mercy. He looked at her and said, "Yes, we do," and shot her in the head. Under Michelle's orders, Joseph turned the gun on Olivia and Nathan, ending their lives in what he later described as a twisted act of mercy. To him, leaving the children alive would have meant subjecting them to trauma. But the reality was far colder. It was about leaving no witnesses. Realizing that Erica's 911 call might have gone through, Michelle acted quickly. She ran to the driveway and locked the property's gate, hoping to delay any response. When officers arrived shortly after, they found the gate locked. Assuming the property was secure and seeing no visible signs of danger, they left, unaware of the horrors that had just unfolded inside the house. Michelle and Joseph returned to their mobile home, confident they had succeeded. But even the most calculated plans can unravel, as we've seen in so many cases on our channel True Crime Case Files. Michelle and Joseph would soon discover that the consequences of their actions were far beyond their control. On Christmas morning, the Anderson property was ominously silent, its snow-covered grounds betraying no signs of the horrors within. On the morning of December 26th, Boxing Day, Judy Anderson failed to show up for work. So, Linda Teeler, her friend and colleague, felt that something was wrong and decided to check on her. She drove to the Anderson family home. Around 8 a.m., she stopped by the house in the 1800 block of 346th Avenue Northeast. The scene she discovered was haunting. The house was quiet, and attempts to reach anyone inside were met with silence. Her growing unease led her to contact the police, setting the stage for the chilling discoveries that would follow. Through the window, Linda saw bodies on the floor and called 911. She told the operator she suspected Michelle. "The gate is locked, which makes me wonder if her daughter did it, which is scary because I might be up here with a murderer," she said. When officers arrived at the home, they were met with a grim reality. What they found would shock even the most seasoned investigators. 6 lives lost, 3 generations wiped out in a single night. Inside the home, officers discovered a scene of unimaginable carnage. Scott, Erica, and their 2 young children, Olivia and Nathan, lay lifeless in the living room with the scent of pine from the beautifully decorated Christmas tree. Gifts were piled high under its branches, lovingly wrapped by Judy Anderson just hours before. Outside, in a shed behind the house, the bodies of Wayne and Judy Anderson, covered with cardboard, were found. Investigators immediately turned their attention to Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe. Living just yards away in a mobile home, they were the most immediate suspects. But when officers went to question them, the couple was nowhere to be found. They had fled the scene, heading north in a haphazard attempt to cover their tracks. Neighbors and family members described the couple who met 6 years ago through an online dating service as paranoid. They kept to themselves, their world seeming more isolated with each passing year. They had black material over the windows, saying neighbors spied on them and were basically just out to get them. They said that they feared for their lives. Their behavior was antisocial. Michelle didn't return phone calls from her surviving sister Mary. However, the family didn't suspect they were in danger. Neighbors described the couple as misfits. They avoided eye contact and seldom left their home. A neighbor said they felt that they only had each other, that they could only trust each other. There was this paranoia about them. They were mostly quiet, but sometimes argued loudly. A neighbor heard Anderson yelling at McEnroe, "You have no job, you have no money, you have no life." However, when Michelle calmed down, she apologized. Even minor annoyances, like a neighbor's cat wandering onto their property or children playing in the yard, would provoke their anger. Anderson called herself the black sheep of her family, but her mother visited them and gave them food and other items. Michelle always brought up money while talking to neighbors. She always said they were poor and struggling, while her parents had quite a lot of money. Anderson seemed distant, withdrawn, and perpetually misunderstood. She said she had been diagnosed with severe anxiety and was supposed to take medication and see a counselor but couldn't afford it. In high school, Anderson was on the cross-country team and in the art club. Her former classmate said, "She was an artistic, sweet girl who hung out with unpopular kids." Back then, Michelle spoke of a volatile relationship with her parents, claiming her father hit her and her mother was mean and didn't understand her. But she always spoke lovingly of her older brother Scott. Neighbors said that in their relationship Anderson was in charge. McEnroe looked up to her and she answered questions for him. Joseph, deeply introverted and socially awkward, worked at a Target store. He planned to marry Michelle and change his last name because of a disagreement with his family. McEnroe was born in San Jose, California. He was diagnosed with a serious blood disorder and had a speech impediment. He never showed a violent side, though sometimes he had fights in school. His mother was protective of her son because of his health problems. Instead of sports, McEnroe read a lot and played imaginative games. In his early 20s, McEnroe spent a lot of time online and playing Dungeons and Dragons. He said he was planning on settling down with Michelle and having a baby within 2 years, his mother said. Being a loyal and passive partner, he seemed to mirror Michelle's thoughts. He had found solace in her company, but that solace came at a price. Over time, Michelle's bitterness became his own, her grievances shaping his worldview. The two had fed off each other's frustrations, their shared isolation acting as a pressure cooker, building to an inevitable explosion. In spite of their physical proximity to the family, the emotional distance between them and the rest of the Andersons was undeniable. Yet, despite their struggles, the family continued to support Michelle and Joseph, hoping they would eventually find their way. The escape didn't last long. Hours after the bodies were discovered, Anderson and McEnroe returned to the property, claiming they had gotten lost on their way to Las Vegas, where they had planned to get married, and decided to stop by to surprise Michelle's parents on Christmas Eve. Their story was flimsy, and investigators quickly noted their nervous behavior. They didn't ask anything about their family or why police vehicles were there. Suspicion grew, and the couple was brought in for questioning. What followed was a chilling confession. Under interrogation, Michelle was the first to break. When investigators asked her why she thought police were at her parents' house, she said, "It's not Joe's fault. It's all me. As soon as I shot the gun, I felt so bad, like what the hell have I done? I'm a monster." As the horrific reality set in, she admitted to orchestrating the murders and detailed her grievances with her family. She described years of feeling disrespected by her family, citing her brother Scott's refusal to repay a $40,000 debt and her parents' insistence that she and Joseph contribute rent after living rent-free for a year. To Michelle, these weren't just minor grievances. She saw her family's actions as a series of intolerable betrayals that could not be ignored. Michelle, at the age of 29, was jobless and discontented. Perceived injustices weighed heavily on her, and the tensions within the family reached a boiling point. For weeks she had been stewing in anger, and that Christmas Eve, her anger would explode into violence. For her, this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment crime, it was a carefully planned act of revenge. According to Michelle, it wasn't just about the money, it was about years of resentment, of feeling unappreciated and overlooked. And Joseph, her ever-loyal partner, isolated from the rest of the family, had embraced her anger as his own. She explained that years of physical and emotional abuse made her snap. Anderson said, I don't care what people say about violence and morality. Everyone has a breaking point. She grew up being told she should never have been born. I told them to stop or I would snap, and they knew what I meant. They just pushed me too far. I just don't know why they had to push me so hard, she said. Michelle told investigators she was tired of everybody stepping on her, and she had made up her mind if her family did not start showing her respect by December 24th, she would kill them. She said the money dispute was just a symptom, and that her rage grew steadily over years of family conflict. I know I reacted wrong, she said. I wish I could just redo the last 10 years of my life. I wanted my mom, brother, and dad to die because they abused me over the years. I wasted my life because of them. It's not fair. However, Anderson's portrayal of her family contradicts the accounts given by friends and relatives. Michelle Anderson's nephew said he'd never seen anything that would bolster his aunt's claims. James Conant, the lead prosecutor on Anderson case, said the grisly scene inside the double-wide trailer is an image he'll never forget. I can remember it like it was yesterday, he said. After she was arrested, she told detectives, when we went up there, our goal was to kill everybody if we couldn't make things work with Mom and Dad. Joseph McEnroe recounted the events of that night and said he apologized to Erica and the children before shooting each in the head. Nathan had picked up the phone batteries from the floor and looked at McEnroe. He said the child gave him the look of complete comprehension, as if he understood. He said, I didn't want them to suffer, explaining that the children would have been scarred for life after witnessing their parents' murder. His remorse seemed genuine, but it couldn't erase the horror of what he had done. Moreover, it was McEnroe's idea to bait the trap for Scott, Erica, and their kids after murdering Judy and Wayne. McEnroe's cousin, Regina Turner, who grew up with him in California, said she couldn't reconcile the allegations against him with the video game playing, eager-to-please loner she knew. It's hard to put together this picture that he was this brutal person who didn't mind shooting someone. He wasn't a fighter. He didn't like confrontation. He wasn't your aggressor at all. 6 weeks prior to the murders, McEnroe was overlooked for a promotion he had been hoping for at his job at Target. He said he was upset about it, and he took it as a sign that their plan should be happening. That's what Michelle sold it to him as. Anderson told the Times, "Life in prison is not enough punishment for me. I want the most severe punishment, which would be the death penalty. I think if I kill a bunch of people, I'm not sure I deserve to live." In another jailhouse interview, she said, "Deciding that I want to die was the most difficult decision I've ever had to make, and I was able to make it without a second thought, because I know what I've done, and I want to take responsibility for it." She also expressed regret toward McEnroe. "I don't want to say who did what. We both shot people, but this is all my fault. I dragged him into it," she said. Michelle and Joseph faced 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, with prosecutors seeking the ultimate punishment, death. They were tried separately. McEnroe sat like a frozen statue in court. He was often racked by shaking sweats as well. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of a couple consumed by greed, bitterness, and a disturbing lack of empathy. They painted Michelle as the mastermind. They pointed to her repeated mentions of the $40,000 she claimed her brother owed her, a fixation that seemed to overshadow everything else. Joseph, they argued, was just as culpable, despite his attempts to cast himself as a reluctant participant. McEnroe's attorneys, on the other hand, framed him as a man manipulated by Michelle, a follower who lacked the will to resist. He was deeply attached to Michelle, often deferring to her judgment. He was an outsider in social settings. His reliance on Michelle for emotional connection and his detachment from others may have intensified his loyalty to her. This social isolation likely contributed to his willingness to carry out her plans. Michelle infected Joe with her paranoid worldview, and he had little outside perspective to counter her influence. His passivity, dependent nature, and need for validation made him susceptible to her persuasion. His ability to carry out such acts, even while expressing regret, underscores a disturbing capacity to suppress moral judgment under pressure. During a jailhouse interview with the Seattle Times, McEnroe said, "I'm sorry that they're gone. They were my family too, you know." Defense attorney William Prestia told the jury that even though his client did something terrible, he is filled with regret and deserves mercy. He mentioned McEnroe's mental illnesses, his troubled childhood filled with bullying, and his record of being a well-behaved inmate. He said, "There is good in him, and there is the potential for good. He is seeking redemption." Prestia said about Michelle Anderson, "She's got a pattern of manipulation, a pattern of wanting to be in control. What we've got here is a pathological relationship. Joe's fragile personality made him susceptible to Michelle. However, Anderson couldn't load the guns, so McEnroe did that, and even brought extra ammo. McEnroe fired the shot in 5 of the 6 murders, and it was McEnroe who made the decision to kill the children. When asked why he shot Erica, Olivia, and Nathan, he said, "I didn't want them to turn us in." Senior Deputy Prosecutor Scott O'Toole said that none of these murders would have happened without McEnroe. McEnroe agreed and admitted, "Unfortunately, that is completely true." McEnroe was sentenced to 6 life terms. In Washington, defendants sentenced to life are expected to remain incarcerated for the rest of their lives. Anderson's trial began on January 25th before a King County jury. Since her arrest, her mental health had been unstable. She was transferred to a state psychiatric institution multiple times. After she was evaluated by 3 doctors, Anderson was deemed competent to stand trial. During her sentencing, she cried and kept her head lowered as her defense attorney, Colleen O'Connor, addressed the court. O'Connor described her client as very remorseful and said she apologizes to everyone involved. Michelle's defense team argued that she was deeply troubled, with a history of mental health issues that impaired her judgment. She resented her parents for what she perceived as their favoritism toward her brother. This became a core justification for her actions, suggesting a deep-seated entitlement to validation and financial support from her family. Her apparent indifference to the suffering of her victims, coupled with her sense of victimization, points to narcissistic tendencies. Michelle's focus on her own perceived mistreatment overshadowed any consideration for the lives she was taking, reinforcing the notion that she saw herself as the central figure in a narrative of injustice. Both killers prioritized their grievances over the lives of 6 innocent family members, including 2 young children. Senior Deputy Prosecutor O'Toole said Anderson held a particular disdain for Erica, blaming her brother's high school sweetheart-turned-wife for driving a wedge between them. Erica was the person that Michelle Anderson truly hated, he said. Erica supplanted Michelle Anderson in the life of her brother. In her final, furious last moments of her life, Erica Anderson looked into the eyes of the woman and man killing her family. Erica had 5-year-old Olivia tucked by one side, and 3-year-old Nathan, still in diapers, climbed on top of his mom in the last moments of his life. He placed his head against her chest next to her heart, and then Joseph McEnroe shot him. They were all shot in the head. They were all shot in close range. Ben Anderson, the grandson of Judy and Wayne Anderson, said that money could have been a factor in the deaths. He said, "Michelle felt she wasn't loved enough, and everyone didn't appreciate her, and she was pushed out of everyone's life." Defense attorney Colleen O'Connor said the murders were not about money. Yes, she talks about money, but money isn't the issue. Her crazy delusional state of mind is what is propelling her thought processes. O'Toole made the case for premeditation. He said Anderson chose Christmas Eve, when her family would be together, armed herself, drove to the house, fired the first shot, cleaned up after killing her parents, and dragged their bodies outside. He stated, "This was a case of pure premeditated cold-blood murder, as you will ever see." Michelle's older sister, Mary Victoria, who also would have been murdered if she hadn't been ill and missed the Christmas Eve gathering, said to Michelle, "It kills me. I loved you so much. Just know they loved you." She said her sister threatened to kill her parents in the past, but no one thought she'd go through with it. Mary Victoria said she did tell their parents about Anderson's rants when they happened. "Who thinks someone you grew up with and loved is going to slaughter your whole family?" So I didn't think it was serious. She was angry. Erica's mother, Pam Mantle, came to court because she didn't want Michelle to see that she broke her. She said to Anderson, "When you shot her, she called 911 not just to save herself, but to save her babies because she knew you'd kill them too. I don't think you're big and tough, Michelle. I think you're a bully and a coward. I am brokenhearted. Every day I miss those 6 people. I know our lives will never be the same." Like McEnroe, Michelle Anderson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors initially pursued the death penalty for her, but later withdrew the request after juries in other high-profile cases declined to impose death penalty verdicts. One of those cases was against McEnroe. King County prosecutor Dan Satterberg said McEnroe and Anderson worked together and were equally responsible, so Anderson's maximum penalty should be equal to what a jury gave McEnroe. Judy Anderson's co-worker Kim Moody said, "I'm glad the death penalty was taken off the table because I feel life in prison will be a lot harsher of a punishment." Joseph McEnroe is currently imprisoned in the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, and Michelle Anderson is currently imprisoned in the Washington Corrections Center for Women. Once partners in a heinous crime, they now lead isolated lives. Shawn Johnson, McEnroe's mother, said that she was not able to speak with her son, but was really shocked by the news, which she found surreal. She described her eldest son as a good Christian. She said that Joseph is a person who, when he sees a troubled soul, will help that person. Maybe that's why he and Michelle got together. Michelle interacts minimally with others, shunning opportunities for rehabilitation. She doesn't have a radio or TV in her jail cell. Do you agree that life in prison is a harsher punishment than death? Tell me in the comments.